Hello, hello, it is Wednesday. It is July 13th of 2011, and this is day 98 number 324. It's Protoss Week. We're going to do an epic PvT today where we look at a very unusual series of situations, talk about how you would cope with them too, and in particular, there's going to be huge amounts of audience interaction. So we're going to have a lot of questions that ends up coming in. We're going to take some questions before it begins so that way we can get a good sense of what sort of things people would like to hear about. But we'll get into that in a moment. The first person that needs to be thanked more than anything is Total Biscuit. I graduated, alright? I graduated like... You know, some people were like, hey, good job, you know, maybe give me like a sticker or something. Look at what Total Biscuit gave me! Oh my god, a commissioned art of me with Zerg units. Look at this. These are overlords. Oh, this is clouds. I actually think this is like a tornado or maybe like a missile trail. These are mutilisks. Oh, look at this Hydralisk, and look at how muscular I am. I even have the number J written on my shirt, and I am flexing. I even have the same headphones on the photo as I do here. I also have 4 teeth, and they're all gigantic. I look like Kylie Minogue. And then also, look at this, midgets with trumpets. Yeah! Yes! Indeed! Abso-freaking-lutely. So, whatever you do, go to Total Biscuit's YouTube. It should be youtube.com/totalhalibut, total Halibut, and like subscribe to him and tell him he's awesome. Because what the wait, hold on, look at this thing. Look at this thing. It's on my door, so it's like I greet you looking triumphant and far more attractive than I do in real life before you see me. I'm drooling. I'm so pumped. Oh, what a great day. Oh yes, thank you, Total Biscuit. Oh, I guess we can begin the daily now. So let's go ahead and readjust the camera. Let's go ahead and tilt this thing up a little bit. You'll note that I found out about the wonderful world of conditioner, and it didn't help. I still have dry split ends. I'm going to get a haircut soon. And this is the way I know how to have a good time. So, interesting announcements coming up. Of course, this is Protoss Week. Next week is Zerg Week, and the week after that is Europe Week. I'll be doing every daily in 2 weeks from now at 9 a.m. Pacific, which should be 6 p.m. CEST or 1800 CEST for any of you who don't like doing maths. So that should be very, very awesome. Is there anything else going on? Well, I'm going to MLG in 2 weeks, MLG Anaheim, and I've especially arranged that way I can say hi to more people. So come so I can say hi to you, and that'll be great. And that's it. I've been recording the After Hours Gaming League all day, which you'll note because I even have an overlay prepared. Yeah, AfterHoursGaming.tv, and I was casting Amazon versus Zynga today, and will be casting Facebook versus Google. I think it was Facebook versus Google that I'm doing afterwards. Yeah, it's going to be good. So let's go ahead and talk about the PvT topic that's coming up today. What I first would like to throw out there is that I'm going to be asking you what sorts of things you would like me to look at from the Protoss point of view. We're going to be looking at a more epic PvT with a lot of craziness in it. So I want you to keep that in mind. A lot of people will ask general questions, you know, like how many Colossus is good to attack with, but I want specific issues that come up for you when you're in crazy games, specifically games where you will generally need to be doing some sort of comeback. So I now have just enabled the question grabber. So let's go ahead and refresh that. So feel free to start flooding with a couple of questions. And while that gets going, one of the big things that we're going to end up doing throughout this daily, you can hear me selecting everything off screen, is we're going to be looking at it from the Protoss point of view at the start of the game. And we're going to be examining a highly unusual spot. Now, for someone like me who plays a ridiculous frick ton and watches a ridiculous frick ton, I can clearly have a more broad vantage point than some of you who, you know, will be going to school full time, maybe come home and watch a couple of games. So for me, I can say something like this is unusual in a general sense. But for you as a player, you might encounter stuff all the time that might be unusual. And the important thing is that you don't label it as common or not common. It's that you should label it as something that I have seen before or something I have never seen before. That's the big thing that I want to illustrate today, because it's very easy to fall in this trap where the amount of knowledge that you have makes you feel as though, makes you feel lost in these sorts of spots. And the worst thing of all, the worst of all that I want to make sure we don't do today, is that you can convince yourself that you're not lost. You can convince yourself of some optical illusion of how strong he is, and you will respond to that in kind. So we're going to do some stuff. So let's go ahead and take some questions. Let's take some just comments on what are general things that people want to ask about in terms of this game. So God Frustrated asks, how can I deal with EMP on with ghosts? Lots of big EMPs. So we'll be sure to focus a lot on that. How to deal with EMP Marauder. Rutsy Gaming also asking about that. So we're seeing a lot of stuff about that. We're seeing some people asking about when are times to transition to Immortals. We'll see that a lot of times that can be quite difficult to be able to do. Some other things. Let's see. So here, I just want to point out something, that there's a couple of questions here and a lot of comments. And again, the whole purpose of this is to help direct the commentary that we're about to see. But a lot of times it's very easy to ask questions that are a little bit too specific. Beforehand. Like, people are asking, like, how viable is 2-gate Robo against a Terran 1-base play? One of the best things to do is just to, like, jump in and play a lot. You want more directed questions, or more big, broad, tactical questions, like, I'm always having trouble getting my third if I'm getting dropped a lot. How do we end up doing that? In this game, there's actually not too much drops, but here's another good thing. People are, iBub237 says, Day 9, yesterday you talked about forcing your opponent away from certain areas. In PvT, I struggle with ghosts and their EMPs. How can Protoss force a Terran away from EMPs? It's a lot of stuff about EMPs. And this sort of question is the one that really helps grip onto some of the issues that are happening. So how does Terran survive late game TVP? All right, cool. We're going to actually look at a lot of that. Oh, here's a great question. Central BS says, Day 9, when is it appropriate to use Templar before Robo? Excellent, great. So right now, this is how we're going to begin the PvT commentary. We're going to be talking a lot throughout the entire commentary about how EMPs work, in particular some other transitions to units like Immortals, when and where are those viable, and in particular this struggle between getting Templar and Tech versus getting Robo. Let's go ahead and pop into the game. We have Xenic Sickness in the top right. Now, let's begin and just point out some fairly typical things that are going to be going on in the course of this game. So we see him doing all his usual stuff. He's making units. There's going to be a production tab open here that I'm actually going to turn off at this point in time. Now, there's going to be some quizzing coming up in a moment, so feel free to have your questions and all that good jazz ready. I'm going to go ahead and stop this question grabber. I'm going to clear the current list of questions. Now we're going to go back to the game. So I will be stopping once the weird thing happens. So there's going to be a lot of not weirdness here. Now, for any of you who are less experienced players, there might not be any benchmark for you to know what weird or not weird is, or common or not common, so let's try to use those words a little bit less for a brief period of time, and just talk about why things would be good or bad in a general broad sense. So right now, we are seeing the probe scout around. A big indicator for the Protoss player is when this gas goes down, and whether a Marine pops out or an add-on pops out. So we see him running in circles. He's actually going to get hit by a Marine in just a few seconds. But if this probe could move up and get a sense that there was a second Marine building, he could get a good little bit of information, as a lot of 2-racks plays have you immediately get an add-on after that. So let's actually come back to look at what's going on in the Terran base, or excuse me, the Protoss base. Protoss is doing something, again, I'm not going to say unusual, because let's say you don't have any benchmark at all. He's getting 2 geysers right off the bat. There's only a few timings where this is really necessary, and one of them is, for instance, a Dark Templar rush is a very common one. Another is just if you really want to go for some big sentry numbers, and you really also want to get a bunch of upgrades in there as well. One thing I want to note, notice that there's no Zealot here. There's been no Zealot made. Often you can make the Zealot, but if you get this early assimilator, you cannot. We could actually barely afford this Stalker. So, moving right along in this game and adjusting my excessively loud chair, we see Xenic Sickness having a lot of money stockpiled up. He sees a Reaper, so this gives him a little bit of information. He knows at the very least a tech lab is there. And we see him throwing down 2 more gateways. Now, whether this is a response or whether this is pre-planned, I'm noticing that Next Sickness has a lot of money in the bank, and it looks like he's going to be taking a Nexus. Now, again, ignoring what is common or what is not common, this is a strong way to defend an early expansion. We get these 2 gas geysers up, we make lots of sentries, and we can easily throw down force fields to mess up a Terran army. On a smaller, more cramped map, let's say something like Tal'Darim Altar at the front of your base, you don't actually need that many sentries. You really don't to be able to do some huge sweeping force fields. On Xel'Naga Caverns, as we can clearly see, this is huge. This is a huge wide open space that we're having right here. So now let me step into the world of the words common and not common. It is not common to get this assimilator. Not many people do this. It is not common to get these gateways quite at this time, and this Nexus at this time. It is very common, though, to just get 3 gateways pretty quickly and then throw down an expansion. The exact timings of what Next Sickness is doing is what is slightly off. It's the exact timings that are slightly weird. But I want you to again note that this is how evolution of play happens in a good way. We take the common little box of, I'm going to go 3 gates and expand, and I'm going to use a lot of sentries to cut up early pushes with force fields. Damn, it's a little harder on Xel'Naga Caverns. I could make bigger, stronger units like Zealots or Stalkers, or I could get a hell of a lot more sentries. The problem that you end up seeing in PvT is, oh man, on Xel'Naga Caverns, I just don't seem to have enough force fields. On Tal'Darim Altar, I do. On this map, I don't. So I'm going to solve that by getting this ridiculously early second gas. It's not actually that big of a stretch. Look at this. We're getting tons of these units out. We're seeing a Marauder. We're seeing a bunker. Everything looks not threatening from the Terran player. He could be making a lot of gateway units that would be consistent with this one thing going down. Excuse me. He could be making a lot of barracks units, which would be consistent with us having seen the Reaper, having seen a Marauder, having seen a barracks. But now we're going to be moving right in, and we see a robo facility. Does this actually end up finishing, or does he end up canceling it? Okay, here we go. Here's the weird moment. Yeah, so oh, back up just a minute. I will admit, I watched like 50 PvTs today, so some of them are sort of blending together in my mind. But getting this 3 warp gate up, and then getting these sentries up, and then following it with a robotics facility. A lot of people were asking about this, this tension between, do I get a robo for the observers in case he gets banshees and also to spot stuff? Or do I go down the Templar route, or the upgrade route, like getting +1 armor for my Zealots, or getting Zealot with leg speed, or getting Blink Stalkers, or even getting DT? They feel opposing, because resource-wise, it's very, very, very difficult to do both of them. So what we're seeing Next Sickness do is a very smart play, which is scouting the front. He does a little bit of gentle poking and prodding, and if he sees his opponent not really revealing much of anything, he's going to go ahead and he's going to get a robotics facility. This is a lot of good pre-planning that has happened. He's starting to build up a force to deal with any sort of Marine pushes, Marine Marauder pushes, and then he's poking and prodding with this probe and this Stalker. And then when he sees, I can't really tell what he's doing, that's when this robotics facility comes down. Actually, we can back up and see the exact time when it pops down. It's going to be in just a moment. You see, here's this push, and he sees the bunker. And in particular, he's going to see, I'm actually going to keep it back, he sees the bunker with 1 Marine in it and 1 Marauder. So in a sense, the mix of units is a pretty clear indication that there's a tech lab. He sees the Reaper. He sees the Marauder. He sees a barracks with a Marine. It's clear that there's probably a barracks with a tech lab around here. But the number is a little bit alarming to a Protoss player. And there you go. He's going to build a robotics facility in response. And this is a planned response, though, because if for some reason a whole bunch of units were coming out trying to attack us early, like some Marines and Marauders, I can easily just say to myself, that man is not going to have Banshees anytime soon. This man is probably not going to have drop anytime soon. So allow me to go straight for +1 armor. Let me go straight for the Templar tech, and it becomes a very, very easy choice to get big, heavy units that are specifically good against big Marine Marauder armies. If you went for the Zealot with speed, or went for the +1 armor upgrade, and he was doing something like maybe 2-port Banshee with Cloak, you'd die very, very quickly. You'd have tremendous amounts of difficulty with that. And so we end up seeing this little morphin. And now comes the moment that's very weird. This is a strategy that is the specific weirdness that I think that not many people have seen. We're going to see the little ripple approach here in a second. Where is it? Yep, see this little ripple here? Okay, it's going to be here. You see it? That's a ghost. Yep, beginning to shoot. Now, suppose that you are playing in the very low leagues, like you just started in Bronze League. You're going to see a huge, crazy gamut of stuff happening. When you get up to the High Masters and Grandmasters level, you start to see less stuff. Things happen in waves. And maybe the 3-week ago to, I guess, 6-week ago wave was a lot of people super interested in just ghost pushing the front. Just getting some barracks, getting some ghosts, and coming at your front and trying to EMP your sentries for a big, crazy, scary attack early. This is the hyper-modern. Like, this is I've only seen an experience in the ladder for like the last week where someone just gets a ghost really fast and attacks you with it with Cloak and tries to kill off a bunch of stuff. And this is the curse that is going to happen a lot. There's actually even a limited amount of strategies that happen in Diamond and Platinum and Gold because they're all trying to mimic what the Grandmasters are doing, which tends to be inside a small box. So then this happens, and here's the curse. It's going to do damage, and then upon the damage being dealt, no thinking happens. You try to return back to autopilot. So I'm going to show you this explicitly. Here's a probe. Here's some probes dying. 1, 2 shots. Because probes get 2-shotted by a ghost. 1, 2. 1, 2. Trying to like block the probes off from here. Chrono boosting on the Observer. This is actually not a particularly slow robotics facility. Look at the damage that's being dealt. Bam. Bam. Right, this is just... And we're going to get our Observer out, and notice that this ghost has 12 kills. It gets a 13th. So, notice I'm still not opening up this tab, right? So we have, it looks like 16 probes. 17 probes, yeah, right? We feel horrible about ourselves. But this is where I want to stop. I'm going to come back, I'm going to show you the Protoss base, and the question I'm about to ask is how much stuff does Terran have? How much stuff does Terran have? I'm not actually going to begin looking quite yet. I want you to think. We see 3 barracks. We see a Twilight Council going down. We see the Observer popping out, just in case. Right? And I want you to try to tell me how much this Terran player has. Specifically, how many Marines, how many Marauders, how many barracks, and how far along his tech is. Like, factory half done. I want you these 4 things. How many Marines? How many Marauders? How many barracks done? How many... How's the tech doing? And also, if you really want, feel free to throw out things like, I think he should have this much stim. This much done on stim. I feel like he should have this much done on the other stuff. Let's see. We're going to get a count. I specifically, yes, so here we see paradoxing 15 Marines, 6 Marauders. Let's see. 10 Marines and a couple of Marauders. I'm seeing 5 Marines, 3 Marauders, 3 racks, 4 Marines, 2 Marauders. It's varying quite a lot. 8 Marines, 2 Marauders, 4 Marines, 1 Marauder, 2 racks, no factory, 6 Marines, 2 Marauders, 2 barracks. See if any of these resonate with what you think. People saying the command center started, 4 Marines, 3 Marauders, no factory. Someone saying I've seen this replay and I know how many he has because I have it open myself. Frickin' jerk. Ban him from my chat channel. 10-ish Marine, 4 to 6 Marauder. Yeah, it's sounding a lot like many are sort of going in the close to 10 Marine count, the close to 5 Marauder count. We see, it looks like there's a lot of people saying 3 racks, 2 racks, stuff being done. Let's go ahead and investigate. When we pop into this, it's a very weird mixture. In the unit counting station, we see 1 Marine, 3 Marauders. We see Stim getting started, and we see 2 racks done with some extra racks. I mean, I guess technically you could have started a factory, but I'm actually going to come back to the production and specifically emphasize what went on. Okay, so there's 1 Reaper that got made, anytime you see a Reaper, you need to say to yourself, damn, that slowed down the shit out of him. That really slows down his stuff. Right after that, immediately we see a ghost gets produced. I think this is one of the dumbest places to put a ghost. Woo, baby, that ended up sneaking by. Looks like he's taking the long route. I still don't like this that much. But, I could be wrong. But then look, it continues to make the Marauder. Continues to make a command center. And there is, oh, yep, and he starts making a Marauder. It's a little bit delayed. And then he starts his other barracks. And this is right when that ghost ends up getting there. And the funny thing is that when you actually sit down and look at this, it's kind of remarkable how far behind the Terran player is. In a typical game, we're at 7 minutes and 32 seconds. Generally, a player would be close to getting his starport beginning some medevacs if he was doing a 3-racks play. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do something I rarely will do in a daily that I'll do all the time in a real game. I quit, I leave, and I go find a benchmark game. 7 minutes and 30 seconds is where that moment happened. So I have a whole lot of games that I just sort of stick out in my mind as those sort of, whoa, holy crap moments, like I didn't know you could do X that fast. Here's a game between Bomber and MC, just to help us get a benchmark. So we're actually going to look at Bomber's timing around, we stopped that game at around 7 minutes and 45 seconds. And we're actually just going to times 8 this until about when we get there. Look at how little the guy had in the last game compared to Bomber in this game. I do this all the time in my own replay research. I have a question, I load up another game, and I'm listening to awesome music this whole time, so I don't really care that this is a little bit of a deviation. And look at this factory getting started before the 6-minute mark. Holy crap. And then look, Stim getting started. Stim was actually started much earlier. I think it was slightly earlier in this game. And then we see the factory getting started, or the starport starting to churn out some medevacs a little while after we quit in last game. Holy crap. And look at, let's actually rewind back to 7 minutes and 50 seconds when we did our little question asking. Yeah, look at this. 2 Marauders, 18 Marines. Can you believe it? That's so many more. And now all of a sudden we have a benchmark. I can say something like, in my usual typical standard game that I have played so many times, that is where my opponent normally is. If you don't do the sort of counting that I just did, here's the problem. Here's the curse. You say to yourself, I'm not lost. I play PvT all the time. That's my best matchup. The Ghost kills 13 probes, and then you go, ugh, because you feel that Terran should have a lot, and you feel that drops should be coming up in a moment. When in reality, this has messed it up so much that you've got to end up seeing for yourself. Let's actually come back to the game now. I mean, once again, right now is when the factory got started in the game we just saw. And at 7 minutes and 50 seconds, yeah, look at Stim starting later than in last game. At 7 minutes and 50 seconds, we have crazy amounts less. This is when the Ghost just got in and did its damage. So now we're going to return back to the Xenix sickness point of view, and we're going to end up starting to analyze this game from a fairly straightforward aspect in time. So, what I'm actually going to pose to you, what I'm going to posit to you, fine gentlemen, is what is the, let's open up the production. What are, there we go. What are some questions that the crowd has? Let's go ahead and start grabbing some of those. We're at the 8 minute and 32 second mark. In particular, I'd like you to begin to ask what sorts of things you think might work. Like, I think that going for X might work, or I think going for Y might work. I think going for nothing but gateways, 7 gateway production is the ideal path to go down. And we're going to try to talk about some of those. And especially, I want you to propose to me what you would do in this situation. Because what I want to know is what the average response would be in a spot like this. Excuse me. We've identified that our Terran buddy has jack dog shit, right? He doesn't really have very much. But let's see what else is going here. Here's some good questions. Yeah, there we go. Requisens says, Day 9, we're going for a Templar tech. When is it viable to go Dark Templars versus High Templars? What about making Archons in a situation like this? There's some great questions. Negative Edge 99 says overwhelmed with gateway units. Let's see here. People saying 5 gateways plus armor would work. What about expansions? Let's ask some other questions about expansions. Let's pop back to this DT versus High Templar idea here for a moment. For the DTs are generally used for controlling space, for keeping an army pushed back, for keeping an army away from you. The one thing that I would propose to you here is, what army? I mean, the Terran is going to have ghosts done. He's going to have the same amount of scan that he would have in an ordinary game, as he got himself a relatively fast command center. So DTs, though they will always kind of be good, I don't actually like as much as going for a High Templar in this circumstance. If we're strictly talking about Dark Templar versus High Templar, DTs, I don't think accomplish their purpose. If I start getting High Templar, I can definitely murder small forces. I can definitely feed back the ghosts, sort of like an obvious thing. And that's probably the big reason I would lean to High Templar here, is that if he has ghosts this early, he's going to have to use ghosts as a crutch. How do I know this? Well, because I went back to the game and I counted his units. He hardly has any, so this ghost had better be doing a lot of big damage for him. So let's take a couple more comments about going for Gateway's armor. You know, I really like this quite a lot, actually, going for Gateway's armor. I personally think there's nothing wrong with going for 2 forges immediately and beginning to get upgrades. Because as we saw in the Bomber game, man, a guy who's just straight up going for units and medevacs is going to have a lot of units and medevacs. In this game, man, a guy who goes for fast ghosts ain't going to have a lot of units. Sure, he battered my economy, but he can't slow down my upgrades. I might be able to produce out of 3 gateways instead of 4, because I have fewer probes, but if I build these forges, there's almost nothing he can do about it pressure-wise. What he has done is he has messed up a lot of my timing attacks quite a bit. Let's see here. Yeah, here's some comments that I'm seeing a lot. A lot of people are saying to drop kind of a fast third. A lot of people are saying Chrono Boost probes. Chrono Boost probes, I think, is always a fine option to do. There's nothing wrong with Chrono Boosting those probes out. But I will note, I still want to lean a little bit towards the upgrades. Not too much, though. I mean, obviously you want Chrono Boost probes to catch up, but if you think about it, if he does a huge hit to your economy, he's messed up all your strategies that rely on that economy. So if you try to fix it in a direct way, then all your previous econ-based attacks are just shittier versions of what they would have been. So I like trying to go down a different path to try to exploit that. Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah. Take one more comment here. Yeah, here's a great comment by EVM43. What about going for a fast Colossus because the starport is so delayed? I actually think that is absolutely brilliant. That is exactly the sort of way to deal with the ghosts in a way that's not the direct thing. Because again, the direct damage Ghost did was, you messed up my probe line. To directly combat that, you'd think, well, I got a Chrono Boost and fix my probe line. The way to step around all this is to say, well, great, if you messed up my probe line by going Ghost so fast, you have no units to mess with me early on. I am free to start stocking up those Colossi, and there's almost no way you can actually do a very efficient, scary push to me. So my Colossus tech is suddenly going to be much easier to grab up. And more importantly, because those drops are delayed, I could even do a push with my Colossus and they'd be a lot stronger. I like that quite a lot. So let's go ahead and resume. Off to resume we go. So we see him throwing guys in the assimilator. Sending forward a observer. And this is always a very reassuring moment, even if you cannot possibly find... if you cannot possibly find out how much he has in the game because you've never seen it before, and you get this observer here, you always constantly want to be checking. Oh, actually, this is so freaking important. You must always check what you think he has versus what he actually has. In a strategy game, you are constantly holding in your head an imaginary image of what your opponent's doing. And what we're doing right now is adjusting that image in between games. I'm not in a game right now. I'm looking at another game saying this will help me for the next time I play. But also, if you're in a game, especially in a scary game, your image needs to be checked regularly. You need to just start stating what you think he has in a game. Not whether it's right or wrong, just state. So the exercise we did between the games, I think he has maybe 10 Marines, 5 Marauders. In a game, you should do the same thing too. You should just say, how big do I think his army is? 10 Marines, 6 Marauders. Because when you get this observer here, you go, oh, he doesn't have anything. Nice, yeah! And then you're starting to feel great. So, interestingly, Next Sickness does something I think is quite clever. He goes straight for Ghost. He goes straight for Templar. And what we're noting is that Next Sickness is saying to himself, I don't need a big army. We don't see him trying to get huge numbers of Zealots and Stalkers and Sentries to defend a second attack. That second attack actually ain't coming. We see Templar and Sentries, which is a very, very weird mix to have early on, but that's fine. Absolutely fine. And also in another subtle way, he killed probes, and losing workers only affects mineral mining. It will never affect gas mining. So you can often, when you've been battered, lost a lot of probes, just say to yourself, what gas units would help me back? We see Templar, we see Sentries, we see upgrades. Losing workers never affects your gas mining rate. So we're going to see a fairly clever play where he just runs up and EMPs a ghost, or feedbacks a ghost. He needed to wait 3 more freaking seconds and he could have killed it off, but, you know, no big deal. This is another great effective technique for him to just basically completely deny any upcoming push and even soften him up. God, I love it when Ghost die. It's so rewarding. One thing I'm not a big fan of that I'm seeing here from Next Sickness is very late Forge. I think he could have gotten his Forge a little earlier. And don't go crazy. Don't make like 3 Forges, get 1, 1, 1, and rush for Templar, you know, and not build any probes. You can do it in a sort of gentle fashion, but I like that we're getting upgrades. I like that we're getting more gateways, but not building with the gateways. We're creating infrastructure for ourselves. We see a teensy little push for what time it is in the game starting to make its way out. But I think a Forge could have been popped out a little bit sooner. At around the 17-minute mark, what we're going to do is we are going to pause the game at around 17 minutes and and take some audience questions. So, a lot of people were talking about transitions to Immortals, about transitions to EMP and this sort of thing, how to deal with the EMP. So what I want to state right now is that Immortals are very specifically purposed units that generally work very well in the early game or when you have a ton of resources. For the most part, they're just very, very expensive units, as we can see. 250, 100, this is just not really a spot you want to be in, producing a whole bunch of those. But anyways, so we don't really want to consider that option at this point in time. And even though Next Sickness might look like he's playing from behind, he's going for a Templar, Zealot with Speed Leg mix, and that's just an all-around good army composition. Just make sure you don't back off on your sentry count too much. So there we see total awesomeness go on, surrounding with force fields, and then blasting them, yeah! That's just an obviously good micro technique. These food counts, I think, can be a little bit deceptive. In the unit counting station, we see that, you know, he's not that far behind on the worker count, and in particular, Terran basically has just gotten up his usual mixture of stuff, whereas Protoss is actually getting 7 gateways, so Protoss is going to catch up real fast here. So that's actually good news. This is actually good news for our Protoss buddy. But a lot of people are asking how this EMP would have worked. Many will look at this battle and say, oh god, the EMP would have absolutely wrecked me and ruined me and made me cry tears of blood. But we're seeing a lot of good spotting go down by Next Sickness, and he's keeping these observers very carefully positioned to not get themselves too vulnerable. So little clusters like this are not actually that big of a deal. And you can easily start splitting things up with nice spreading. I'm going to head back to the production tab right here. Nothing wrong with throwing down some excess storms. Don't try to always find the big fat money storm. But now we are seeing, oh, alas, 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 some amazing EMPs get off. Now, one thing that I want to note is that, in general, as a general rule, if a couple EMPs completely obliterate your army, one of two things went wrong. The obvious one is that you had all your spellcasters clustered together. Right? That's the obvious one, where you have like sentry, 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 and all your Templar are there. But what happens quite often is people will try to spread out their units moderately well. They'll get EMP'd and they'll lose, and they'll think, I should just try to split better next time. Another huge problem that you can actually have is you just don't have enough stuff. As I've said many, many times, in this game, the fastness of the Ghost butchered all the rest of Terran's early game. Just mauled his early game. Likewise, getting a lot of Ghosts in general will small-in your army by a substantial amount. So we can see here, the best EMPs that you have ever seen in your life just happened. Not a big deal. I mean, we're going to get a storm. That storm actually hurt the Protoss' stuff more than it hurt the Terran stuff. And Protoss is having a fairly easy time cleaning it up. In other words, this was good. What's going on back in the base is good. The upgrades, the Zealots, the Templar. Let's come back to the Sickness Can. And we're seeing him just take himself an early expansion. I like this as a third because it's easiest to defend. Screw the fact that it's a gold mineral. It is easy as hell to defend. And you know what we're seeing Sickness do? He is keeping up with this huge Zealot Archon production. This is something that is very important to do in low resource situations. This I would identify as a low resource situation because there's been pretty big confrontations when both players are on two bases. There's been pretty big confrontations when both players are on two bases. It's a low resource kind of game. And whenever you're in lower resource small armies, you have to have lean unit mixes. You must absolutely have lean unit mixes. For a Terran player, this is just... Terran mixes are actually just generally quite lean, just Marine Marauder Medevac. But Zealot Archon and Zealot Templar is big. Lower Stalkers for the Protoss. Very, very few Stalkers. Very few Immortals. Very few... anything that costs a good amount of minerals and a good amount of gas. Zealots only cost minerals. Archons, Templar, Sentries, big gas focus. We just want to be making lots and lots of stuff. Each unit should be cheap in an individual way. So we're seeing Sickness exploiting this, and now he's going to be able to make more and more gateways. Now, why would you... Here, I'm actually going to pose this question to you. Why would I not want to make a lean unit mix like this in a normal game? Why would I not want to make just Zealot, Archon, normal stuff if we're getting into multiple base territory? I'm going to take a look at what people are saying. Bum. We're going to take some questions. Bum. People are saying, you'd get rolled. Less versatile. People are talking about tanks and all this stuff. There's one thing that I want to note. It's very important not to do the following mistake. Not to say something like, I can think of a vulnerability that this would have, therefore, that's the thing that would counter it, you know? Like, for instance, people are saying, like, tanks would eat you alive. Let's assume even that he's going for a Marine Marauder Medevac. If he's going Marine Marauder Medevac and he sees you going pure Zealot, Archon, Templar, sees you just doing all that sort of stuff. If he suddenly had tanks, it would be good, but he still can't quite take the time to invest in that. Trying to look, let's see. Not mobile enough, not good in small numbers. Actually, Zealot Archon is incredible in small numbers. Not cost efficient, it's actually quite cost efficient. Let's see, he might drop you to death. We're starting to get on there. People can have more effective unit mixes. You know, the big thing is that, yeah, here's a great way to describe it by Nat1360. Lean unit mixes don't fare well in larger battles. That's really the big one. In terms of large battles, I mean, if you can just picture a huge amount of Zealots going against a huge amount of Marine Marauder with Medevacs and Ghosts and EMPs going down, the Zealots can't quite wrap around. As a matter of fact, about half the Zealots are not even engaging in the battle. Lean unit mixes work very well in small to mid numbers, but kind of stink when you get pure mixes of them in large numbers. I mean, the Roach is perhaps the best example of this, that it's kind of like this ultra super cheap unit. But once you start to get in big numbers, like they can be force fielded easily, they can be zoned easily, bigger armies tend to just crush it. Yeah, you don't want to be really doing this. You want to have a little bit more variety. You want to be trying to get those Colossus, a few Blink Stalkers in there. I mean, these units are so good that they're always going to fare okay-ishly. But when you're in these low econ situations, this nice lean mix is good in small numbers. In big numbers, it's just way too EMPable. It's way too kiteable. If you have small numbers of Terran units at your door, it's not a big deal. So correctly, we're seeing this Protoss player just try to zone expansions. I'm actually going to delay the Q&A till around 18 minutes. 18 minutes. Oh, there's a fast question. Faricho asks, what does zone mean? Zone means you position your units in a way that forces his units into smaller packs. So, for instance, here's an extreme example. If I had a whole bunch of Phoenixes here, and if I had a whole bunch of Phoenixes here, it would be zoning his drops. They could only really move through this area. Just forcing him into a certain position where he does not really want to be located. So let's see here. We have another little tiny army moving out, and Xenix Sickness is going to have to make sure that he stays incredibly ultra-focused. And there's actually going to be a moment coming up where all of a sudden things go a little bit sour for our Protoss friend. Running up to do the storms, always a good technique. Can't ever really be bad. You don't want to try to get too greedy with your storms, as I've said before. But we see once again this little sneaky observer. Yeah, he's starting to get some really nice picks off there. But this is the sort of engagement you don't really need to do as a Protoss. I mean, there's so many units back home. And if we just look at the production, there were a ton of Zealots that he could have made. So we see, suddenly, oh my goodness, how rough, how rough. Getting guided so easily. There goes down the Archons. Morphing in some Jealots. Sniping everything. And per usual, this is always a rough position to be in. But this situation, what I want to try to highlight, yeah, I mean, we're in a clear bad food deficit. We're making some Zealots and Archons, which are very, very good in small numbers. I would like to pose to the crowd any opportunity to ask questions. This actually looks quite bad for our Protoss hero, but it's not as bad as you would think. I'm actually just going to check something real fast. Right, awesome, that's good news. Yeah, let's go ahead and take some questions right now. Let's talk about here. F5, F5, F5. Magsack says, Dear Day 9, how would you determine if you should keep Templar or immediately morph them into Archons? Archons are much better in the smaller units. Templar get more and more effective as your armies get bigger and bigger and bigger proportionally. Templar are strictly better against bigger armies because you can hit more units with an individual storm. Archons are a great unit all around, but in general, if you're just looking to have stuff quick and dirty, churn out an Archon. Like if he's coming right at the front of your base, don't try to hide your Templar to try to wait till they have enough energy for a storm. Just immediately Archon him and get ready to go into battle. Especially if you want to try to be aggressive, you want to favor Archons more. Aggression is another huge, huge key. Also, if you don't have storm yet, that's probably another good one. Random Dude 517 says, Day 9, once you transition out of lean unit mixes, once you start to get more expansions up, and also keep an eye on his expansion count. If you are taking more bases, and he's really not, and he's being aggressive, you need to stay lean because you need to get a lot of stuff out fast. But if he's being passive, now you have the time to get other units. If he is starting to expand more, you're going to have to get bigger units because the confrontation is going to be bigger. Trav Bang says, Dear Day 9, since Terran has really small numbers, does that make the Zealot Archon mix even more effective at dealing with this attack from Terran and getting back into the game? Yeah, I mean, it's a little tough because Marine Marauder also works well in small numbers, so there's a lot of control situations that are good. But well, let me rephrase this. The Marine Marauder medevac stuff works very well in small numbers against someone who's going robo-focused, because they're pretty much just going to have Zealots, Stalkers, Sentries. If he's going Templar-focused, the Marine Marauder doesn't quite work well in small numbers. It's more of medium-ish numbers, and then into larger, so that way they can hit the good EMPs. So medium-ish is kind of what Terran's really going for. But you're noticing I'm talking a lot about unit, like army sizes. Kind of important to just take a little bit of time and think about, what units am I building? When do these units work well in battle? Colossi work great in big numbers. So maybe I should be going for bigger amounts of Colossi before I attack. Last question, last question, last question, last question. Here's an amazing question by Murmur Wark. Says, Dear Day 9, if a Terran chose to take a third, would it be best for Protoss to go attack it or expand himself? How do you decide which to do? This is a rough situation. That is a great question. I personally think that if we're in this situation, I'm actually going to go ahead and resume it while I answer that question. In this specific situation, one of the reasons why I didn't feel like Protoss is that far behind is that this observer here and this observer here have a good sense that there's not really any expansions about to pop out. Excuse me. More gateways being produced by Next Sickness because his macro slipped a little bit. And he's churning out many units, and it looks like he will keep these Templar, kind of going for a middle-ish army size. But if Terran expanded right now, I would feel obligated to immediately begin kind of making a big attack on it, because I have an aggressive mix. This is not a mix I want to be king passive on. This is a mix that I use to kill stuff with. Sometimes I make this because I'm trying to get ready to defend a huge scary push. Most of the time I make this sort of mix because I really want to push him back and maybe do a little damage to him. So if I saw a third, I'd want to take this and really bring the noise hard. If I had, say, Templar and a lot of Stalkers and a lot of Colossi, then I would be more inclined to take a third. I have a little bit more of a late game army mix. That's actually a great question. That's actually making me think a lot. I'm trying to think about what I would do. But we can see one of the reasons come up now. You see those EMPs? Actually, this is probably one of the greatest examples. Earlier on, I was saying if EMPs kill you, sometimes it means that you have the worst positioning of all time. But most of the time, if you lose to EMPs, it means something else was going wrong in terms of the army mix. Look at the way that the shield distribution is after this EMP. It basically hit everything. There's some Templar here, which it tragically did not hit, but army-wise, it hit basically everything. And you're kind of noticing, this is not actually that much from Terran. Proportional to this, I mean, even if we come to the army supply size, I mean, Protoss has a little teensy bit smaller of an army. These medevacs count for a ton of food. I mean, they're basically 20 more food in these 10 medevacs. So, I mean, I don't really feel like this is that huge of a difference, and we're seeing that just one storm can turn the tide of battle. So as we can see, if you just have moderate positioning and you can get off one storm, Terran's going to be in a bad spot. What is so good about Next Sickness is that he has a ton of ground units. Look at this. 2 storms got off. One was okay. One was decent. And everything is deep red. Not a lot of energy. And tons of units. This is crazy amounts of stuff from Next Sickness. What Next Sickness is doing right is that he is having a good macro set, a good upgrade set. He has all these gateways here. I cannot tell you how many replays of buddies, you know, who are just silver level players being like, hey, you want to check this out for me? And I'll look at the game. He'll get EMP'd and he'll have like this much stuff and 4 Templar and be like, yeah, I need a position better. And it's like, yeah, I don't know so much about that. Now also, thing to note right now, we're expanding behind an attack. And also, if I'm Terran, gosh, look at that. Amazing EMP. Absolutely amazing. I also know that this player could have only just possibly gotten an expansion, so I'm going to bring the noise. Look at this. 2 force fields and 1 storm, and suddenly this army is not looking scary at all. Even though the perfect EMPs landed. You must be aggressive. And now we're seeing this Protoss player expand double time. And now that he's done this, we need to start thinking about some late game techniques that we're going to see come out of the Protoss player. He's keeping more Templar around. Templar work better in bigger late game mixes. He's thinking about poaching forward. He's trying to be aggressive because that's his unit mix that he wants to go for. We're going to start seeing some more late game incorporations mount in here. We can see the feedback is indeed quite good against Ghosts. Come on. Feedback, feedback. Alright, that was bad. It's very bad. You don't want that to happen. LOL. LOL. Oh, LOL. Notice how many Zealots and Archons there are. I cannot emphasize that enough. Just want to have plenty of those. Yeah, upgrades going down. Alright, now we're starting to do a little more late-gamedness. Wouldn't mind seeing another Forge pop down here. Would not mind seeing Blink pop down here. Would not mind seeing more Stalkers pop in here. One of the reasons why I think that we're seeing this buddy stay lean on his numbers is the simple fact that my opponent is also basically going to be broke. Before it was 2 base, these 2 Nexuses versus the 2 Nexuses here. And in essence, it's like 1 basing Terran. It's like a 1.5 basing Terran because this is a gold. If Protoss is starting to go, man, I'm low on minerals, then yeah, even though he's taking 2 more bases at once, he's still going to be staying for a little bit of a leaner side. And now I want to come up to things like Immortals and Colossus. As we're getting max, that's a great time to start thinking about getting those Colossi incorporated in there. Now that we're clearly getting to a point where we're finally starting to stabilize on more than just a base or 2 in the later stages of the game. Some freaking great force fields, the Zealots just ripping them up. Now is a decent time to begin thinking about things like the Stalkers and Colossi. Immortals, if you can get a lot more bases, but Immortals, I would honestly argue, are more expensive than the Colossus. Actually, for the amount of damage that Immortals do, they're ridiculously expensive. You need like 8, 9, 10 Immortals in big army fights to be really effective. And they have a specific limited purpose. You need a ton of money to start getting Immortals. Colossus are actually so good at just dealing out damage that just having a couple Colossus in your mix is just generally always good. But I would be getting the Colossi before I'd even begin getting the Immortals. Really, truly. The Immortals feel way too expensive to me. So Sickness will be pulling back. We just engaged in a huge trade. And you're starting to see more and more why I always say things like, when these army mixes are small, keep building a lot of lean stuff. These engagements are going to work out much better when he's consistently trying to engage us in some sort of fight. Archon's ripping apart the Medivacs. Yeah. And for the last little bit, we've only seen Zealots, Archons, Templar, and attacking. Don't forget attacking. Attacking is one of the more important things that we're seeing here. This army mix is so good in these small numbers that we want to exploit this by forcing him to mess with us in small numbers. We can see the Terran money getting a little bit high, and that could proportionally mean that he's messing up a little bit. And one thing that I really want to criticize the Protoss on is that he's not checking this expansion. All High Masters and Grandmaster play revolves around management of expansions. If Protoss wins, I would still yell at him for having not checked this a lot, because what if this Terran player is taking this? I mean, this is going to make us go into overdrive mode. This is going to make us be like, ah, and really start doing some craziness. There should always be like a couple pylons being planted over here, because it makes sense. If we have an aggressive army mix, moving in from the sides and doing little aggressive attacks, that still looks consistent to me. Having Templar run around to do some storms, trying to isolate a couple of units. The one thing that this army mix is going to be a little concerned about is some drop tech, so this again makes a lot of sense why we're being aggressive. There's a lot we're not seeing from Terran that he actually can't really quite pull off. Archons are incredibly good, by the way. We've seen so many EMPs go off, and I still want you to note that plenty of damage is being dealt by these Executor Archons. Yeah. And a Megamorphin. And he's still getting upgrades. But this is just atrocious that he's not checking these 2 bases. That's actually, like, vomit-inducingly bad. But we're slowly starting to see that, hey, all those trades that we've been doing somehow got my Terran buddy mined out. Protoss doesn't even know about this base because he's awful. That's actually just so bad, I can't believe it. Makes me want to puke. And yeah, you see, now that all of a sudden things are starting to calm down a bit, we have finally encroached in here enough to where he has a small army. In particular, we killed off a lot of medevacs. Oh, yeah, I have a... Where's the other guy? Yeah, there's a Robo and a Robotics Bay. I like this quite a bit. As we would start to get more and more Colossi, I would slowly incorporate more Stalkers into the mixture. I like that quite a bit. I think that is quite solid. The usual Chrono Boost going down on the usual things. And we're seeing, suddenly, Next Sickness is just trying to hold a control point. Notice this weird shift in tone in the last several minutes. Upon taking this expansion, a late-turn play, it's not these desperation expansions that were earlier. It's like, oh, okay, I'll calmly take this. Alright, things have calmed down a bit. I killed off his army. Let me buy time for me to get my Colossus up. And now, I'm just going to go on the defensive, right? Suddenly, Next Sickness is just sitting here. He's not constantly trying to push down to deal damage. He's just holding it. Now he's pulling back a little bit, waiting to get into a good spot. And he's buying time to get himself up Colossus.
Upgrade complete.
Scout this Next Sickness. You're so bad. Yeah, so, the reverse is true if you're trying to go Templar after you're going Colossus. If you're going Colossus, you want to get into a position where things are stable, where you can kind of hold your ground, and then eventually sort of swing in with those Templar once you have the safety and security that these Templar are bringing you. You can even do stuff like have Blink Stalkers and Zealots and Colossus and say to yourself, okay, well, the Blink Stalkers and everything are helping me be more secure as well. But complete and total defensive mad mode going on. Fire Protoss, buddy. And then he gets these Colossus, and he's going to pull back. He's not going to rush in to do an engagement because these Colossi work better in bigger armies. These High Templar work better in bigger armies. These Archons are actually just incredibly good units. And the Zealots are here for a little bit of support. Zealots would work a little bit better in smaller mixes. But that's fine. All's good. And yeah, look at this. Getting a ridiculous ton of gateways. Getting a Stargate, no doubt, for like a mothership or some business like that. And from insane, crazy aggression in the early game, we saw Next Sickness stick to the same mix as Zealot Archons with a dash of Templar, and the instant he was able to stabilize and start getting some Nexuses up, we saw a big shift to these late-game focus units, the Colossus out of these Robo facilities, and as he was shifting to that, no aggression anymore. He wanted the big armies for these Colossi. And hey, what do you know? We have some extra special late-game units, the Stalker. So now we're going to take some questions as that daily went on longer than it needed to. Let me just state that Fun Day Monday for next week in Zerg Week is that I want you to submit me a replay to Monday at day9.tv of you only engaging in battle when your units are under creep. This includes things like Contaminate, this includes Flying Unit, and most of all includes your freaking ground units. Have creep everywhere! Yeah, bring a queen into battle, vomit a creep tumor in the middle of it, and start fighting. I would also like to note that on Sunday, there will not be a daily. There will instead be subscriber monobattles at 7 p.m. Pacific. So tune on into those. Subscribe, get a chance to play. Go to justin.tv/day9tv/subscribe if you'd like to join in the fun. It's a voluntary subscription. I'd also like to note that in Europe Week, also doing subscriber monobattles, except it'll be more like at 9 a.m. on Sunday. So, Brambolino says, Day 9, should I always spend Templar energy on feedbacking ghosts, or should I try to get some storms off quickly? There's some moments in time where I want to lean a little more towards feedbacking the ghosts, but in general, it's like if the ghosts are leading the army, and like all the rest of their army is hiding back here, yeah, bring your Templar up and neutralize these ghosts before they do anything. But almost always, you're trying to get the storm off. The Ghost EMP, if your opponent is good, is just gonna happen with a lot of frequency. And when I say good, I mean like the higher up you get, the more guaranteed they are to get off a decent number of EMPs. But the fact remains that if you have good upgrades and Zealots with speed and some Archons and some Stalkers with blink, you need only 1 or 2 big storms to really swing the tide back in your favor. Nubiro36 says, would you still consider Archons to be a recycled unit? No, I think they're great. I love Archons. Archons are actually freaking painful to deal with. Oh! OrbTL says, Dear Day 9, when turtling is a Protoss, how can you effectively harass your opponent? By the way, I hope that is the Orb. Hope it is, because Orb knows best. That is actually kind of a big deal. How does a turtling Protoss effectively do damage back? A more significant note is if the Protoss is on the defensive. Not just out of choice, but out of necessity. Let's say he's getting dropped like crazy. DTs are always kind of a reasonable choice. There's been some experimentations with Warp Prism drops, but the big thing I want you to note is tech can rarely be affected by harassment. Rarely can it be affected. So if a player is harassing me a lot and he's going to be picking off a couple probes and pylons here and there, I'm going to get forges. I'm going to be chrono boosting my upgrades like crazy because at some point I'm going to stabilize. At some point I'm going to stop turtling in my base, and when I do stop that, I'm going to have a giant upgraded powerful army that I can crush him with. And this is something that we see a lot out of the increasingly good players. You'll see them, while getting harassed, tech up to Templar, tech up to other things. This doesn't address your question of how do you do the harassment back. DTs right now are one of the only good options. Blink Stalkers are another one that are okay to do, but I wouldn't try to overdo it as much. I would reserve, I'd reserve that for like the really tip-top tier of folks. You don't actually need to do big harassment back to Terran to mess them up. You need only to defend and successfully sort of establish your money composition. So, Suds says, Dear Day 9, how would this composition change if Terran went for Tank Marine Medevac play? Probably not that much, to be honest. I mean, you might pop out a single Immortal, a little bit of Immortal. It also depends on the game state. It actually depends hugely on the openings. Damn, I don't have a good answer for that. It depends so massively that going through all the deviations would be another daily in itself. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. So, Nix SC says, Dear DayJ, how do I deal with drops in this style? A lot of players like MC, if they see you going for drop, they're just going to get Blink Stalkers before they get and sell it with leg speed. Because in their eyes, you can either have a big army and not drop, or have a small army and do drops. So if you're doing drops, I'm going Blink. If you're going big army style, I'm going Zealot. And then you just sort of swing back to the Zealots eventually. And again, if drops are coming at you, focus lots on upgrades. Those are the hidden heroes of defending against good harassment. Got frustrated. Says, why are you so awesome and where can we buy a Day 9 shirt? I'm awesome because I consume lots of caffeine. And the t-shirts are coming up within 2 weeks, I want to say. Yeah, within 2 weeks, Last question. Last single question. Hey, 1919 says, Day 9, what can you use to pressure if your opponent goes Hellions? I'm going to divide the going of Hellions into 2 broad categories. One is a player who does an early Hellion drop. It's going to feel kind of the same way as an early Ghost attack that we saw in this game. It's going to deal a lot of damage, but your Terran buddy ain't going to have much of anything else back home. So you can easily sort of stabilize and do your usual funny monkey business. But, just a usual handful of stalkers, not overdoing it. Now, if your opponent is going a lot of Hellions because he is going for some kind of mech play, the best response is building placement. You can do wonders with good building placement. Helps a ton, and I would not treat it that differently than if he was going for big drop harass. I'd favor the Blink Stalkers as my primary unit. And Hellions are actually so good against Speed Zealots that I don't actually really recommend him too much. It's hard to do it right. If he's going like for a pure mech, like a Tank Hellion mix, Blink Stalker Phoenix, baby. Woo! Graviton Beam lifting. And let me just state one thing. Do not try to blink onto the tanks to do damage. You will mess yourself up hard. Because your Stalkers have a tendency to blink into a tighter pack. And then the splash hurts them so badly. That's going to wrap up the daily. Doing a PvT tomorrow. Yeah, PvZ, PV Protoss. God, I suck. Protoss vs. Protoss tomorrow. Also, go to the After Hours Gaming League for more epic top tech company dueling it out action. Ending now the daily.